Welcome to part 3 of the series. Here we're going to go over the very basic concepts of modding and the tools and materials you will need. The first concept is the difference between tools and materials. Materials are essentially raw items that will be modded, and tools are items you use to mod the materials. When I first started modding, I did all of my mods with two tools, a nail file and a precision screwdriver set. These are really the only tools you will need, but I recommend getting a couple of other things. Try to get sandpaper. I personally use the nail file 90% of the time, and I'll talk about it a little bit later in this video, but you do need sandpaper if you're going to be sanding large surfaces. If you're familiar with the cyoubx mod, sandpaper is a better idea than a nail file. That being said, I did the entire cyoubx mod using only a nail file. I would also suggest getting a knife of sorts. If you're not allowed to have a knife or are not allowed to use a knife, you can use really any sort of blade. You can actually use scissors as well. I've done that before. And if you have a precision screwdriver set, then if the flathead pieces are sharp enough, you can also use that to scrape away plastic. You might also want to consider investing in one of these. This is a Dremel tool. Most of you are probably familiar with the Dremel brand rotary tool. However, I find that those are really expensive. They have better functions and they generally do a better job. However, since you're just modding cubes, which are made of plastic, something like this will be just fine. Again, this is something that I would consider investing in, but if you're not allowed to use one or are not allowed to even have one, don't worry about it. You don't need it. In fact, I just got this a couple months ago, and I did all my modding without this before, and I did everything just fine. So you don't need this, but I find that this to be a very helpful tool, and I've been using it a lot since I got it. So now a quick note about the nail file. This one here is very thin, and the great thing about this is that, first of all, there are two sides. This is a polishing end, so in sandpaper world, this would be a finer grit, and then this is significantly rougher. And so for the most part, I do all my sanding on this, and then I polish with this side. Now the great thing about something that's this thin is the fact that it's very flexible. This is very, very important. You don't want one that's rigid, because then you're really just better off with sandpaper on a table, because this is a larger surface. If you're going to get a nail file, I suggest getting one that's somewhat flexible. The reason for this is, if you're familiar with the cyoubx mod, where you round off the corners, doing it with sandpaper is very difficult because you have to manipulate the sandpaper, and it's just a mess. And I personally don't like using knives for mods that are that significant, because that's a lot of plastic that you're shaving off. So I like to use a nail file, and the good thing about this one is because it's bendable, if you have any round surface, let's say this, you can coast it on there, like so, and then when you start sanding, if you sand with the curved nail file and then go like this, in a circular motion, you'll be able to sand away the bumps a lot faster. And my cyoubx is not with me right now, but I can tell you that the results are really, really good. So consider buying a flexible nail file if you don't have one. You can try drugstores, I think, for a nail file, or you may already have one laying around in your house. As far as materials go, you're probably going to have to be creative here. It really depends on the mods you're doing, and depending on the mods that you do, you'll need different materials. So for instance, in our case study, I modded this guhong. I wanted to have an anti-popping mechanism, so I had to get screws. So this would be material, but obviously you may not be doing this mod, and so you might not need a screw. So it's just something that you have to keep in mind. But one thing that you will need for modding is you need something that I'm going to be calling a template, or template, depending on where you live. So template is going to just be a stock cube. It doesn't have to be a guhong, it can be any cube, depending on your vision statement. So in our case study, we will be using a Dian guhong as our template. This is a good template to use because this cube already has decent properties based on our vision. So if you don't know what my vision is, you can check out the second part of the series. Notice that I did not choose a Zanchi. The two cubes are very, very similar. However, the Zanchi is structurally more complicated with the wings on the edges, and performance-wise, they're fairly similar. Based on our vision, we'll need something that prevents it from popping, so we'll choose screws to act like anchors, and from here, we'll know that we need a screwdriver set, a rotary tool, and super glue. Going back to our vision, we'll probably need a nail file and a knife as well to sand away pieces. So you might be wondering how you're going to know what tools and materials you need. Don't worry, in part 5 you'll discern the things that you need. For now, just understand what a template is and start thinking about the resources you'll need to have to continue the mod.